I want to remember what it was like to feel and to love and to laugh.
We live in a time where we are more connected than ever. Thanks to the internet, we're able to communicate with people all across the world instantaneously for seemingly no cost. Social networks, direct messaging, video call apps, and even email have ushered in a period of time where, regardless of where we are, we have the tools to connect with others whenever we want. If you were alive in the 90s, these technologies felt almost like science fiction, the kind of things you'd only see in movies, but here it is now, and we barely noticed that the future had arrived. As fantastical as these ideas seemed back then, it was exciting to think that someday this technology would be available to us, but with little to no entry fee, with the exception that you're giving away personal data to marketing companies in exchange to use it. We would be able to live in a world where not only could we see loved ones in the flesh, but over a screen. Distance wouldn't be a problem anymore. However, this isn't the world that we got. And for many, those methods of digital communication have become a bleak symbol of distance rather than a tool to complement one's life. The world has become a smaller place because of these advancements in technology. We have the ability to be connected to others via digital signals and hardware, but modern conditions have changed that technology from something that augments people's lives into a substitute. Consider that from when you're a child, you spend years with your family, go to school and create bonds with new people. You get to spend time with them on a daily basis and grow alongside them. These bonds feel like they'll last forever, but eventually you discover that most of them don't. We eventually leave school to enter the workforce. Everyone goes their separate ways, sometimes to different cities or even countries, leaving behind family and the bonds that we spent decades forming. Communication technology was supposed to help us maintain these bonds, and to some extent they do, but its value pales in comparison to the sense of community that you once had. Our bonds start fading, and your day-to-day life is to blame. This isn't your fault though. Jobs are artificially scarce to protect the bottom line of corporations, so we have to travel afar. We're expected to take on multiple roles in the workplace and often work far more than the assigned 40 hours a week, because otherwise your paycheck will be too light or it'll jeopardize your chances at a promotion. Over a third of your day is spent at the workplace, longer if you take into account commute times. By the time you're home, you're exhausted, and all you want to do is eat, sit in front of the TV, and maybe play a game to pass the time. Then go to bed and get ready to do it all again tomorrow. When a weekend arrives, you're too tired to do anything significant. You go out, maybe you make some new friends every now and then, but you never truly become close to them. Or you end up staying at home, trying your best to de-stress from the week that you've had, scrolling through social media feeds, seeing the lives of those you were once closest to, how they've changed and grown, and a sadness sets in because you wish you were there to see it. You wish that they didn't have to leave. You wish that you didn't have to leave. You wish you weren't alone. Loneliness is a growing problem around the world. Despite the fact that we have so many ways of communicating with each other, we've grown ever more alienated from our own communities due to the unreasonable demands of modern life. Younger generations who are currently in the workforce have been hit particularly hard by this. Many have found that they need to support oneself financially before catering to their emotional needs, hence the notion of self-care has become so prominent, but that in itself is a task, transforming what was once a natural part of life into a form of labor. Various governments across the developed world have even started to take action to combat loneliness, which has been described by former US Surgeon General Vivek Murthy as a growing health epidemic that's associated with the reduction in lifespan, similar to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. In my home country of the UK, Labour MP Joe Cox, who represented my small hometown of Batley, established a commission on loneliness, which investigated ways to reduce loneliness across people of all ages. In 2018, Conservative MP Tracy Crouch was given the newly created title of Minister of Loneliness, but she resigned from her role 1 year after being given a title and has yet to be replaced. Although combating loneliness was one of Cox's top priorities in office, she was tragically murdered by a right-wing extremist in 2016, and the Commission, like many other social programs under the Conservative government, was no longer a priority. When discussing countries that have a problem with loneliness and isolation, there's one country that's often brought up: Japan, and for good reason. A growing number of people live alone in Japan. Among the 36 developed nations of the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, Japan is 7th in the world. Germany, Norway, Denmark, Austria, France, and the Netherlands are all ahead of Japan in this respect. But it's worth taking into consideration that all of these countries rank high on the United Nations Happiness Index, whereas Japan is one of the lowest among developed countries with highest standards of human rights, at rank 62. In this video, we will explore the various factors that have contributed to the social and financial issues plaguing Japan, how in the absence of human connection and intimacy, markets have manifested to fill this gap in ways so personal that it's hard to imagine, how the burden of endless productivity has overtaken every aspect of people's lives, and the history of economic failures which left many workers without social mobility or financial stability. Later on, we will look at the people whose lives have been potentially irreparably damaged by the demands of late-stage capitalism, and the growing amount of lives tragically lost due to stress, hardships, and solitude. Let us look at why the people of Japan have found themselves under neon loneliness. From an early age, people in Japan are taught that dedicating oneself to work and education is extremely important. Schools operate for around 6.5 hours a day for 5 mandatory days a week. However, most schools are open on Saturday for optional classes, which students are encouraged to attend, and the majority do. The Japanese government is even pushing to make the 6-day school week a standard, despite being lowered to 5 days a week back in 2002. Thankfully, schools in Japan recognize many national holidays, and summer vacation lasts around 40 days, but the time taken up by school takes away vast amounts of time from the formative years of children and teenagers. Students are also encouraged to join after-school clubs, which can be beneficial to socialization, but homework is assigned to them as early as the 1st grade, taking even more time away from their personal life. It's also worth taking into consideration that it's common for many students to have long commute times to and from school, taking even more time out of their day. All of these factors can make it harder to form friendships and even relationships among older students. Japan has a more formal approach to communication compared to most countries. Openness about one's emotions isn't necessarily discouraged, but avoided. The time to develop friendships in general also takes longer than it does in a country like America. Outside of school, many elementary students spend the vast majority of their time with a parent, most often their mother, and there's little importance given to playtime, especially with peers the same age as them.
They cannot see the outside, living in a very closed, very small world, only working is existing.
Japan has a notoriously grueling work culture. Ever since the aftermath of World War II, the country has had an intense focus on strengthening the economy, and later on it developed a focus on personal growth within one's career, so they can attain financial stability in the hopes of someday getting married and making a family. As time has progressed though, much like the West, the demands of the Japanese workplace have increased to the point of endangering the lives of workers. In many workplaces, it's expected that employees only leave once the boss leaves, and it's impolite to leave before any of your colleagues do. Convenience stores even sell clean shirts for those who haven't had the chance to go home. Over a fifth of Japanese workers work over 80 hours of overtime a month, usually unpaid. 1 in 10 workers clock in over 100 hours, and on average, Japanese workers use only 50% of their annual entitled leave, averaging to only 8.8 days. Many people in Japan are literally working themselves to death. There's even a term for it, karoshi, which 191 people died from in 2016. The majority of them died most commonly from heart attacks, strokes, and even starvation. On July 25, 2013, 31-year-old NHK journalist Miwa Sado died from congestive heart failure after working 159 hours and 37 minutes of overtime. Sado's death was not made public until 4 years after she passed. According to NHK, this was at the request of her parents. A month prior to her death, Sado emailed her father saying, "I am too busy and stressed out and think about quitting my job at least once a day, but I guess I have to hang on." She died alone. She collapsed in her bed in her apartment with her mobile phone still clutched in her hand.
Screw you, capitalism!
Japan has a great emphasis on productivity throughout a person's life, and work is considered one of the pillars of leading a fulfilling life. It's part of what's called Ikigai, a concept with no direct English translation, but means a reason for being. Iki meaning life and gai meaning value or worth. It contains 4 principles, all of which overlap with each other like a Venn diagram. It includes what you're good at, what you love, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. But what's noteworthy here is that all of these principles are related once again to productivity and work, and therein lies the flaw with this concept. Because with many people in Japan and even across the world, what you get paid for isn't always fulfilling, but a means to an end. According to a 2019 study by Randstad Work Monitor, among the 34 countries surveyed, Japan had the lowest job satisfaction rates in the world, with 30% of workers claiming to not be satisfied or neutral, and 21% claiming to be dissatisfied. This isn't all too surprising given the amount of hours that people dedicate to work, but there are other factors to be considered here other than the lack of free time. Like many other developed capitalist countries, wages have been seeing a steady decline compared to the cost of living. Many companies have been making efforts to curb the excessive amount of work people have been doing the past few decades, but due to the drop in productivity, this has resulted in stagnating wages. Alongside this, permanent employment or seishan is becoming increasingly uncommon and moving towards temporary or non-seishan work, leading people to feel that there isn't enough stability in their work for them to consider meeting a significant other, settling down, or even starting a family. Unsurprisingly, when a human need remains unfulfilled, a gap in the market is created, and companies in Japan, both big and small, have leapt at the opportunity to take advantage of this. It's well known that host and hostess bars are a popular fixture in Japanese nightlife. Originally there was just hostess bars where young women would spend time with men in their downtime, talking and flirting, refilling their drinks, lighting cigarettes and singing karaoke. It could be said that hostesses are like a modern version of geishas. Physical contact and sexual discussions aren't allowed in most clubs, but red light district versions of these clubs do exist, known as seppu kyabakura. Host clubs, the male counterpart to hostess clubs, operate in a similar fashion. The hosts tend to flirt more with their clients than female hosts do, and offer more entertainment, such as performing magic tricks, dancing, or even comedy skits. These clubs have existed for a long time though, as early as the 60s, and Japan's culture of hosting guests existed long before these, with the aforementioned geishas. In the past few years, maid cafes have also become a popular fixture in Japan. They operate in a similar way to hostess bars, but are designed to appeal to more younger clientele, especially otaku, an often pejorative term given to people, usually young males, who consume large amounts of media related to anime and manga. Unlike hostess bars, maid cafes operate much like regular cafes, albeit with a more fantasy-like aesthetic. Maids are usually very young, cute women who dress up in French maid outfits and cater to their clients' needs, from serving food, offering over-the-clothes massages, entertainment, and even spoon-feeding them. They also refer to their clients as master or mistress. There's strictly no touching, and photography is often forbidden in most maid cafes. The maids themselves will usually adopt a personality trait that you will find in an anime or manga, of which there are many types. But the majority of these are ironically two-dimensional. Many otaku, however, are drawn to these well-defined personality types, since they're familiar and predictable, but that familiarity could potentially have its drawbacks. People are emotionally complex, and when you're trying to develop a relationship with another person, it's unfair to assume that they fit into a niche like fictional characters do. In Japanese culture, friendships and relationships generally take a longer time to foster when compared to Western countries, largely due to formalities and expectations people are expected to abide by there. When it comes to situations where they find themselves in larger groups such as school, the workplace, or even social events such as weddings, formalities and rituals are in place which don't allow for much interaction with strangers, taking away the pressure of making small talk with strangers or people you barely know. Outside of this though, many people prefer hanging out in groups rather than a coupling. This alleviates the potential for more personal discussions and offers security so they don't have to worry about what people outside of their group think of them, especially if they're involved in an activity. Group activities are obviously extremely popular in Japan, given the famously lively nightlife available in major cities there, what with the abundance of clubs and bars and obviously karaoke. This kind of socializing in and of itself is great since it allows one to express themselves among a group of people that they're familiar with, but it doesn't offer much space for far more personal interactions. Certain actions within relationships carry far more gravitas in Japan when compared with other countries. For example, an invitation to your house isn't something that's taken lightly. There's a sense of obligation to it, and is not something that's commonly offered to someone that you're not too familiar with. Discussing more personal topics, such as exploring one's emotions and desires, is another thing that requires a relationship to have grown significantly before they're brought up. As for entering a romantic relationship with another person, there tends to be far more commitment to getting to know a potential partner before expressing any desire to take it to the next level. Some people will go on dates beforehand, but unlike dating in the West, physical intimacy isn't considered a desired part of the process, other than holding hands or perhaps a hug, the latter of which is only really done in private since the Japanese aren't big on public displays of affection. Once they've reached a certain point, there's kokuhaku, otherwise known as a confession of love, something which, if you watch anime, you might have probably seen. In the context of hetero relationships, the man is most commonly expected to deliver this confession, but it's not uncommon for women to do so too. It's a daunting idea to Westerners, but one of the people in a relationship will outright tell the other person that they love them and that they wish for them to be their girlfriend or boyfriend.
Will you go out with me, Nagisa? I love you, Nagisa. I want to spend every day of my life together with you.
Although this may sound drastic, it's worth noting that even though Westerners have some leeway in how we express how we feel about someone, such as telling them that we like them, the Japanese don't have any such term that can convey a feeling that sits between romantic interest and outright love. Unfortunately, many young people in Japan simply have little to no interest in dating or having children. According to a survey from the National Institute of Population and Social Security Research, 70% of men and 60% of women aged 16 to 34 are not married and not in a relationship. Another study found that a third of people under the age of 30 had never dated, many of which claimed to still be a virgin. And according to the Japanese Family Planning Association, 45% of women aged 16 to 24 were not interested or even outright despised the thought of sexual contact, and 25% of men felt the same way. The Japanese media have even come up with a term for the diminishing interest in sex, sekusu shinai shokugun, or celibacy syndrome. The population in Japan has been on a consistent decline for years now. In 2012, fewer babies were born than any year in recorded history. This was also the same year in which the sale of adult diapers were higher than those for infants. Even though the demands of work and lower wages have played a huge role in this, the shift in gender roles has played an important part too. When it comes to relationships, there's still an expectation among many that the husband should work while the wife stays at home to look after and raise the children, but women have become far more independent. They want to develop their careers and have autonomy beyond being a carer, therefore they have less inclination to enter a relationship if it means sacrificing part of themselves in the process. However, as mentioned earlier, employment has become increasingly unstable. Promotions are less common than they were in the past, and wages aren't enough to support families. Because of this, though, there are millions of people who still want some form of intimacy, so where do they turn? In recent years, services have started appearing that cater to far more personal needs, specifically the need for relationships, ranging as far as renting people to be your girlfriend or boyfriend, or even something far more personal like a family member such as a sibling or parent. Some companies such as Family Romance will even let you rent out an entire family to enjoy a dinner or conversation with. These services are also used by people who wish to attend events but not show up alone, or even when you want more people to attend your wedding. Many of these services were actually created with these as their primary intention, but as the need for companionship rose, services expanded to cater to that need. In a video from the YouTube channel Asian Boss, the host Max hires Shihomi as a girlfriend for the afternoon. It costs 6,000 yen per hour with a 2-hour minimum, so roughly $120 for a date. From the very start of the date, they break down the barriers that take a long time to get past as Japanese relationships go. They start with a handshake, then proceed to walk down the street holding hands. Then they go to eat a meal and discuss the services that the company she works for offers, and why she does this job. She says that she knows that there are many people in Japan in need of companionship, that a lot of clients she's had have never had a girlfriend, or they simply don't have the time for a relationship and want to know what the experience is like. And she wants to help them with that, which is honestly a very noble and kind reason for doing this. The scope of Shihomi's work has gone beyond that of emulating the experience of a romantic partner too. In a response video on their own channel, host Max D. Capo mentions that Shihomi was also hired to play the role of a daughter to a couple that wasn't able to conceive a child, just so that they could temporarily come close to the experience. Shihomi also says that there have been times where she's been hired and met people who she felt that she had a real connection with, but due to company policy she wasn't able to pursue it any further, ironically creating a situation where a client's desire for a relationship has undercut Shihomi's desire for one too, thanks to the commodification of companionship. People's desires for intimacy in Japan have at times veered out of the realm of the physical and even beyond interacting with another consciousness. Many Japanese companies have been developing technologies and media that caters to the needs of the lonely. Over the past few years in Japan, there has been an increasing amount of effort put into creating products that are focused on emulating emotional and verbal intimacy. For decades, there have been dating games which are sort of a text-based adventure where you usually choose from a selection of potential romantic partners. You spend your time learning about them and choosing from a prescribed list of responses in order to gain their favor. Over the years, these have become extremely popular, even in the West, where you'll rarely find a week goes by without seeing a dating sim in the new and trending games on Steam. There are virtual reality games where you can enjoy spending time with a virtual partner or indulge in some more lewd activities. Even on YouTube, you can find 360 degrees videos where you're in the company of another person, while you listen to them talk about their day and pose suggestively for you. You don't have to look far to find portrayals of intimacy and companionship in Japan. The country has a gigantic industry around sex, producing pornographic media with both real and animated persons that cater to almost any kink that you can think of. Sex workers are abundant. In most places it's illegal, but circumvented easily with the blind date rule, where it's fine if you don't pay the worker directly but through an agency instead. In Tokyo, however, it's completely legal, so long as the sex worker registers themselves and works in secure facilities. More recently, far more advanced technologies have become available on the market. One that got a lot of media attention both in Japan and around the world was the Gatebox Virtual Home Robot by the messaging company Line. It works much like popular home assistants like Google Home or Alexa, but unlike those, it has a choice of various holographic anime characters inside which react to your requests. Anything from general chit-chat to asking it to sing or dance. While you're away from Gatebox, it can interact with you via your phone. It'll let you know how much it misses you, or you can update it on how your day is going. At the end of the day, it will relax with you at home and bid you good night when you go to sleep. All of this can be enjoyed for the substantial fee of 298,000 yen, or around 2,600 US dollars. The company produced an ad that goes over what it's like to live with the gatebox, and I won't lie, it's a little bleak. There's a link in the description if you want to see it.
なんかさ、家で誰かが待ってるっていいもんだな。
There may be a chance that you've heard about the gatebox before though. In 2018, there was a story going around about a 35-year-old man named Akihiko Kondo who married his gatebox virtual assistant Hatsune Miku in an $18,000 ceremony in which 39 of his friends attended. Akihiko claimed that many people supported his decision and the template for happiness doesn't fit everyone. However, his mother didn't share this sentiment and refused to attend the wedding. During the ceremony, when the rings were exchanged, the wife's ring was placed on the finger of a stuffed version of Hatsune Miku. The developer Gatebox actually allowed their customers to sign marriage registration forms, which allowed them to wed their virtual assistants. 3,700 people signed up for this right, but of course these marriages have no legal standing. Although there is clearly a substantial demographic of people that are using the wide array of goods and services available to satiate their need for intimacy, including renting people to act as their family or significant other, there is one particular kind of client that these services are popular with and want to experience what it's like to have a girlfriend for a brief period of time. The kind of person that is, tragically, becoming more common in Japan. The modern-day hermit, otherwise known as Hikikomori. The phenomenon of the Hikikomori started around the early 90s, at the beginning of what was later called the Lost Decade, or Ushinawareta Junen. After a period of economic boom in the 70s and 80s thanks to Japanese industries pivoting towards manufacturing and developing new technologies, the asset price bubble collapsed after the country's accelerated growth came to an end due to inflated stock and real estate prices, along with overconfidence in their valuation and monetary easing policies. As a result, a generation of people leaving college to enter the workplace were left out in the cold and struggled to find any work. Many workers who found themselves in employment ended up in temporary and unstable positions, much like many people do today. The Lost Decade later became the Lost 20 Years, or Ushinawareta ni Junen, because despite brief periods of growth, Japan struggled to maintain it, and they struggle with its effects to this very day. Many of the victims of the Lost Decade are now Hikikomori. It's estimated that up to 500,000 middle-aged people live the lifestyle of Hikikomori, and another 500,000 in their mid to late 20s do as well, with even more on the horizon. Hikikomori are characterized as people who spend the majority of their time in a single room, rarely leaving the house other than to buy groceries, and some rarely, if ever, to socialize with people in person. Some foster relationships online with others, but many have a fear of social interactions. Almost all Hikikomori are NEETs, an acronym meaning not in education, employment or training, but some have been in these institutions in the past. Many Hikikomori have expressed that their experiences in educational institutions or the workplace cause them to retreat from the stresses and demands of working and academic life. Many people in Japan consider Hikikomori to be lazy or work shy, but this is a gross oversimplification of a complicated issue. One common trait among the vast majority of Hikikomori is that they suffer from some form of psychiatric problems, ranging from various conditions across the autism spectrum, including Asperger's, PDD-NOS or pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, depression, anxiety, and varying personality disorders. American journalist Michael Zeeland-Zeiger claimed that the behavior of Hikikomori is close to that of people who suffer from PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, and that they've discovered independent thinking and a sense of self that the current Japanese environment couldn't accommodate. This was back in 2006, and obviously little has changed, and the number of Hikikomori has grown exponentially since then. Older generations have a tendency to blame technology for enabling the lifestyles of the Hikikomori. The seemingly endless amounts of media available at their fingertips, streaming services, video games, anime and manga, all forms of escapism from the reality of Japanese life. However, even though technology has had a role in exacerbating the Hikikomori lifestyle, there is no conclusive evidence that it's the cause. In a segment produced by France24, we see Yusuke, a 32-year-old man who lives as Hikikomori, spending most of his time in his room, consuming media while avoiding interactions with the outside world. Like many Hikikomori, he lives with his parents who take care of him, but they also mention how they're ashamed of the way he lives. Yusuke retreated to this life after traumatic experiences at university, where he was bullied by professors and teachers. Another person, this time a woman, Alice Tanaka, talks about how she's experienced two phases of being Hikikomori, once while in college and another afterwards. She got a job and a boyfriend, but eventually relapsed into her old lifestyle. When Alice talks about the time when she was able to enter the world once again, she refers to it as being spared, as though living as Hikikomori is a fate similar to death, and it's an understandable analogy. Being closed off from the rest of the world and living a solitary existence can make a person feel as though they might as well be dead, and despite the fact that older generations accuse technology of enabling this behavior, social media at the very least has given them a way to connect to the outside world in a safer space without the pressure of having to adhere to social norms. One thing that is clear though is that both Yusuke and Alice, much like many Hikikomori, don't want to keep living this way. They're clearly both in a great deal of emotional turmoil and talk about how they feel as though they're incapable of doing anything, or that they're empty inside. In a documentary by Euronews, we see Hitomi, a 23-year-old woman who lives a similar lifestyle as Hikikomori, but she's found a space in which she can maintain a semblance of human connection. She's worked and lived in a 4 square meter cubicle in a cyber cafe called the Manbu in Tokyo for the past 2 months. She says how she enjoys the isolation, but the feeling of having other people nearby at most times brings her comfort. She's somewhat estranged from her family, who she claims never gave much attention to her and opted to focus on her siblings instead. Hitomi also talks about how she's been in poor health for most of her life and didn't expect to live past the age of 20, but now she's at the age of 23, she doesn't know what to do with her life. In other words, death was Hitomi's only goal in life. She says that it's good to be alive, but she feels as though she's drifting along in life, and that her new goal is to be happy and joyful, and eventually become a masseuse. But like many others, she belongs to a lost generation, stuck in limbo while society demands more from Hitomi and people like her. Like many other countries, Japan unfortunately stigmatizes mental health, and in cases like the Hikikomori, some see their behavior as a weakness, a personal failing, or a failure to adapt to the rest of the world. Although the healthcare system in Japan is good, little is done to raise the awareness of mental illness, and as a result, many people deny that they or someone they know might be mentally ill, and when one does seek help, the support system in place is lacking. This, of course, can sometimes lead to often dire consequences. Before I discuss this, I would like to say that if suicide is a sensitive topic for you, I've included a timecode in the description if you wish to skip ahead. Along with being one of the developed world's lowest countries on the Global Happiness Index, Japan also has one of the highest suicide rates in the OECD, ranking at 7th place with 14.9 suicides per 100,000 people. The leading motive behind suicide in Japan is defined as health issues, which includes both physical and mental health problems. The figures given don't categorize these as separate things, so there's no way of knowing the exact figure related to mental illness. As for demographics, 70% of suicides are men, and it's the leading cause of death for them at the ages of 20 to 44, and also for women aged 15 to 29. The majority of victims are classed as not employed, which includes people who are unemployed, retired, and people living off government assistance. The second leading motive is financial hardships and poverty, an ever-increasing problem in Japan. Wataru Nishida, a psychologist at Tokyo's Temple University, believes that isolation is the #1 precursor for depression and suicide, and that Japan's history with honorable suicide may play a small part in this, such as a samurai who would commit seppuku or kamikaze pilots in World War II. Nishida also mentions how suicide isn't considered a sinful act in Japan. Historically, it's been seen as a way of taking responsibility. The high suicide rate isn't a problem exclusive to younger generations in Japan though. An increasing amount of middle-aged and elderly people are taking their lives, notably those who live alone and have remained in long periods of isolation. The term for this is kodokushi, or lonely death. Those who die this way have family members but are rarely visited by them. The demands of working life and the need for productivity once again intervening with the relationships between people. There are people in Japan who die alone in their homes and are left undiscovered for days, weeks, and even months. This is becoming such a common occurrence that a multi-billion yen industry has been created for the purposes of cleaning up the deceased dwelling, including body disposal and the cleanup of any contents that have been expelled from the body after extended periods of decomposition. The cost for the cleanup of a mid-sized apartment is around $5,000. Services such as these aren't just for those who died by suicide, it's also for people such as Hikikomori who have died from natural causes or accidents, but the growing need for them is a worrying trend. You may have also heard of Aokigahara, which has been dubbed the Suicide Forest, an area near the base of Mount Fuji. In Japanese mythology, it's said that Aokigahara is home to ghosts of the dead, but for decades now, the forest has become one of the most popular sites in the world to commit suicide, most commonly by hanging or drug overdose. Because of this popularity, local authorities have had to place signs in front of the forest, urging people who want to end their lives not to do so, along with including resources they can use to help them change their mind. In more recent years, officials have even stopped publishing the number of deaths in Aokigahara in an effort to remove the forest's association with suicide. In 2003, a record 105 bodies were found there, and in 2010, the police stated that over 200 attempts at suicide were made that year, around a quarter of which were successful. In that same year, an investigation into the people that died in the forest found that men in their 50s were the most commonly found victims, and the number of men in their 30s and 40s had been increasing over the past few years. 57% of all suicide victims were out of work just before they died. Given their age range, it's extremely likely that they all suffered from the effects of the lost 20 years.
今までの人生、嫌なことしかなかったので来ました。誰も探さないでくれ。
A few hundred years ago, it would be common for the Japanese to confront death and be in the presence of loved ones before it happened, who would then assist in burying them. But because of the fragmented lives many people live, burdened by the demands of capitalism, there's less opportunity to be close with loved ones, both in life and in death. One thing that I intended to make absolutely clear throughout this video is that in no way should we promote the idea that in order for Japan to escape the situation they find themselves in, they should abandon their cultural norms and traditions in order to adapt to modern working conditions and the demands for productivity. In fact, I endorse the complete opposite of that labor, be it in a system based on capitalism or anything else, should accommodate the needs of a culture. Early on in this video, I mentioned how relationships in Japan develop at a much slower pace compared to countries in the West. This is how things have been there for a very long time. When it comes to something like dating and making friends, we have our own process and they have theirs. What I aim to illustrate here is that the process of developing bonds with other people has been severely disrupted by the absurd amounts of productivity that workplaces and even the Japanese government want from people. Also how the cultural norms created by work, such as not leaving work until your boss does or doing as much overtime as possible, has exacerbated these problems. And unlike those personal norms that have existed for a long time, the ones related to work and productivity have been created as a means of maintaining workplaces with the highest amount of productivity possible. And not only are they alienating people from each other and hindering personal growth, they're sending people to an early grave. It is easy to believe and accept that loneliness is a personal failing, that those who live solitary lives but want to connect with others aren't willing to put in the effort to do so, but this is only a part truth, and a simplistic view of a problem which has an institutional origin. The industries which have arisen, and the products created as a result of loneliness, are a testament to the fact that the people of Japan still want intimacy, both emotional and physical, but the barriers that are keeping them from attaining human connections are insurmountable and at times almost impossible for a single person to break through. Every single one of these barriers, be it financial strain, alienation, emotional distancing, stress, mental illness, and indeed loneliness, have all been put in place by capitalism. The people of Japan have been stretched to their limits over and over again throughout history, yet still managed to persevere. As early as the Mongol invasions in the 13th century, to the tragic and needless atomic bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the country has always managed to overcome and rebuild. This time, however, the threat is more existential and intangible. It's a slow and painful demise that the country's people are suffering as they're being guided by the invisible hand. The Japanese population across all ages have been suffering for over 30 years now. Almost every waking moment of people's lives there is dominated by an endless need for labor and productivity, leaving little time for personal growth, pleasure, and building and maintaining relationships with friends, lovers, and families. This relatively new culture built around maintaining one's career above all other aspects in life is literally killing people. It shouldn't be ignored, and it most definitely should not be accepted. There is something important to be learned from the problems Japan faces though, a lesson that we should all take heed of. The rest of the economic world is not immune to these same crises. In fact, in countries such as America and even my home country, the UK, it's happening right now. Most full-time positions are at minimum 40 hours or more, an amount which is excessive for the vast majority of jobs. Many workplaces will expect you to commit to overtime whenever you're asked, and if you don't accept, they'll hold promotions or wage increases to ransom. Productivity is at an all-time high, while wages have stagnated for the past 40 years. Whilst job searching, you may be applying for one position, but in reality you'll be expected to do whatever is asked of you, with no reward for doing so beyond your basic pay. If you've been on a job hunt before, try to think back on how many listings said that you'd be required to wear multiple hats. It's a cute term for employers to use, when in reality it means they want you to do the job of several employees so they don't have to hire anyone else. For many people, one job simply isn't enough. Around 5% of Americans have multiple jobs, which is around 13 million people. Employment isn't stable in the West either. Non-contract jobs are becoming increasingly common, and in a country like the US where your health insurance is tied to your employer, if you have a long-term health issue or get into an accident, you could be in an extremely dire situation. In the UK, there are controversial zero-hour contracts in which employers aren't obligated to provide workers with an allotted amount of hours per week to work, leading to many people working either too little to support themselves or beyond what they are able to. Many businesses give less than a day's notice for when they want someone to come into work, leading to unstable lives, and it's not uncommon for businesses to reprimand employees for not being able to come in when they're asked, even though zero-hour contracts were originally created to give part-time and casual workers flexibility in their work lives. Almost every day of the week, people are robbed of their time and labor, while the stresses and demands of work eats away at our personal lives. We're becoming no more than automatons, designed to fulfill the need of employers. Everything extraneous to the work environment doesn't matter to them, and if it was up to them, you would abandon the things that you care about if it made you a better worker. So we have to ask, how does a country like Japan bring itself out of its current situation? Right now, there are government programs in place that are attempting to remedy the issues such as the low birth rate, declining population, and the increasing elderly population, and even assisting Hikikomori get back into the workplace. Government-sponsored group dates called konkatsu take place to encourage people to find a spouse, but the requirements for participation are extremely limiting and still adhere to gender roles that are becoming outdated. They may require male participants to be in permanent employment for more than a decade or earning incomes as high as 5 million yen, whereas women need only be single and be employed. The expectation here is that a successful pairing would eventually result in the husband being the breadwinner and the wife staying at home, which, as mentioned previously, many Japanese women have lost their interest in. Caps have been put in place for overtime work, but it's still a lofty 100 hours a month. Some larger businesses have started to include various amenities in their workplace, such as bars, gyms, and even petting zoos, but it's only a band-aid on a much larger problem. As for the Hikikomori, although many of them are being prepared for the working world once again, there's no guarantee that they won't relapse. They may be able to change, but the world won't change to suit their needs. That is, in essence, the problem with Japan, and by extension, capitalism. Everyone is different. We're not all suited to the demands of the modern world. For some people it's completely overwhelming, and to ask them to simply ignore that and soldier on regardless is an act of cruelty. A cruelty which some people endure every single day. If you look at some of the highest ranking countries on the Worldwide Happiness Index, you'll regularly see Finland, Denmark, Switzerland, Iceland, and Norway near the top of it. In fact, for 3 years in a row now, Finland has been at the top spot. The difference between these countries, such as Japan, the United States, and the UK, is that all of them offer substantial safety nets for those who need it. Free higher education, universal healthcare, childcare, extended maternity and paternity leave, substantially shorter work hours, shorter school hours, no homework, a focus on maintaining a richer personal life, larger amounts of vacation days, less emphasis on growing in your career, but instead taking joy in what you do, and empowering collectives of workers. They're doing something right in these countries, and the rest of the world needs to pay attention. If Japan continues down the path that it's on, it won't end well. It's a tragic irony that the country that for the longest time had the highest life expectancy in the world is losing people of all ages to hopelessness and isolation. The people there deserve better. We all do. But our futures keep being sold to build the fortunes of megalomaniacs who don't care about the happiness or even well-being of their workers. This pandemic that we're currently in has proven that definitively. If we want to achieve a better future, we have to accept that as things stand, it won't be given to us, but it's ours for the taking. Thank you for watching.
If your situation ever becomes too painful to endure, remember, it's okay for you to escape your problem. I don't want a single one of you to think that an unfair reality you've been forced into is the only one that you have to live.
Thank you very much for watching, especially if you made it through to the end. This has definitely been my most ambitious project yet. I did a lot of research into it, which I've put in a Google Doc in the description. If I butchered any pronunciations, then I'd like to apologize. I consulted some people about translations, but if I got anything wrong, then please let me know. I also want to say how grateful I am to all my new subscribers and everyone who's been watching my videos recently, both from Thought Slime and those who have found me by chance in their recommendations. I've received so many wonderful comments and great feedback. It's genuinely been overwhelming, and it really encourages me to keep doing this and continuing on, knowing that it might actually lead somewhere now. I got partner status with YouTube recently too, which was also thanks to you. I really can't thank you enough. I'd also like to thank my good friend Kurashu. He's helped me find so many clips for this video and created some incredible graphics. Without him, this would have taken so much longer, so show him some love in the comments. And also, thank you to Dada Music, who kindly made the fantastic track that you heard at the beginning of the conclusion. I highly recommend you check out their music, it's gorgeous. I've linked their channel in the description too. Of course, I'd appreciate it if you would like, share, and subscribe to my channel, and click on the notification bell just so you can see when my future videos are uploaded. And leave a comment if you feel like it. I read every one I receive, and I love feedback. Thanks for watching once again. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and take care of yourself. Bye bye.